All right, welcome everybody. It's great to be together. It's great to see all of you. I'm very excited about our study together. And following Aiko's lead, I'd love to invite you to put your name and your location into the chat because we're all still getting to know each other here because we cover so much of North America. So I'm really excited to welcome our teacher for this week. Rabbi Lynne Goldsmith is currently the rabbi at Temple Or Hadash in Fort Collins, Colorado. She also serves as an adventure rabbi, which is a cool thing. So look up adventure rabbi because it is neat to learn about that kind of alternative rabbinate and alternative Jewish engagement that people are doing. And I'll also mention, since I've known Rabbi Goldsmith a while, that she served for most of her career as the chief rabbi of Dothan, Alabama. I don't know if that was your official title, Lynn, but I'm gonna make
Oh,
you
it
chief rabbi.
was. Actually, I was the chief rabbi in Southeast Alabama, as also the only rabbi in Southeast Alabama.
That's how you get to be chief rabbi, be the only one in Southeast Alabama. So I'd love to invite you all to just join me in the blessing for study, and then I'll turn things right over to Rabbi Goldsmith. Please join me.
Okay.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed is the one whose mitzvot make our lives holy and who commands us to immerse, to engage in words of Torah. As we make our way through our discussion here, as always, if you have thoughts, comments, questions to share, you can raise your hand electronically or wave at us, and either I'll see you or Rabbi Goldsmith will see you, or you can put comments into the chat. And I'll turn things now over to my colleague and friend, Rabbi Lynne Goldsmith.
Well, hi, everybody. And thank you so much, Rabbi Micah, for giving me this opportunity to speak with you today about hope. And I have to say, in doing the preparation for this, I found hope. And I hope, you see how I did that? That this hope is contagious. Um, when I teach, I like to not be the only one talking. I certainly could do that, but I think that it's number one, annoying. And number two, you all have thoughts, and I think we learn from each other. And this is very, very important. And the other thing I want to say is normally also when I teach, I put text up for you to read, but the author that I'm using today is quite wordy. And I had to synthesize exactly what he was saying. So I don't have text to put up. And I thought actually it actually makes sense because this week's Torah portion is Bamidbar. We end up in the wilderness, and God speaks to people in the wilderness because it is so quiet out there you can't hear anything except for God's voice. So, not that I am God, but I will be speaking a little bit more than I normally do. So, anyway, at this time in our history, both as Americans and as Jews, it feels like it's just one damn thing after another. We go from one crisis, we try to take a breath, and then the next crisis hits us. And yet, I think compared to times past, it's really not so bad. And I'm not trying to say that we have a suffering Olympics here. I mean, people, if you're suffering, you're suffering, and it doesn't matter what caused it or how bad things are, you feel bad. But anxiety about our present and our past and our future, especially, is anxiety, no matter what the cause is. So, with our toxic political climate and climate change, the situation in Israel and the rest of the Middle East, housing costs, healthcare access, and the increase in drug overdoses and mental illness with the young people, we have a lot to worry about. But I went back and I reread some of Elie Wiesel's writings. I haven't read him in quite a while, and I did have a book that I got decades ago called A Jew Today. Um, it was written in 1978, and as Rabbi Micah reminded me, that was the year before before he was born. Um, and he started it with the following. He said, "Once upon a time, in a distant town, surrounded by mountains, there lived a small Jewish boy who believed himself capable of seeing good and evil, of discovering dawn within the dusk. And to him, all things seemed simple and miraculous: life and death, love and hatred. On one side were the righteous, and the other side was the wicked. Like God, I looked at the world and I found it good, fertile, and full of meaning." So if you read this, it seems like Wiesel was a very optimistic child. Then came the Holocaust. And I have to say, he was 12 years old when he and his family were taken to Auschwitz. He lost his family, His mother and his sister were murdered on the day they arrived there, and he and his dad survived, although later on in their time in the camps, his dad also died. The world, as he understood it, of course, was completely shattered. And as he said, on one side, there were the executioners, and on the other side were the victims. But what about the onlookers who remain neutral? Those who serve the executioner by simply not interfering. To be a Jew meant we had to fight both the complacency of the neutral and the hatred of the killers. So I'm sure, actually, if you could raise your hands, how many of you have read the book Night, which was his accounting of what he went through at the Holocaust? If you haven't read it, it is a difficult book to get through. He waited 10 years to write it. He didn't want to. He really didn't want to write it, but he did. And it is an unbelievable account of what he went through during the Holocaust. So how can Nina, do you have your hand up? Oh, where did you go? Ah, she popped. Okay. So how can someone who witnessed what he did as a very young adolescent and who experienced the very worst of mankind that mankind could be, how could he come out not only sane, but get married and have a child? He had a son. And to me, that's amazing. Wiesel brought a child into the world that he knew was capable of the worst kind of evil. And that, to me, was the ultimate expression of hope. So I ask you, and this is a question for y'all to answer. Y'all, you see, I was in the South for 10 years. I can't help it. Where did this hope come from? And how did he maintain this hope despite everything that he went through? What kept him going? What gave him that hope? Bob Hammer?
He had 12 good years before all of this with his family, and that was a important grounding that had to serve him even when the individuals were gone.
Very good. And certainly that was wonderful. Family to him was very, very important. And having that background and knowing it was there, he'd want to create his own. And yes, that was very good. Anne, Paley?
There's a book called The Choice, and that woman also lived through the Holocaust. And there's the essays of the last rabbi of the Warsaw Ghetto. And what all these people had in common was a deep, deep faith in God. And that's what gave them the hope to go on, to sustain themselves. And they were able to visualize a better future through that faith.
Yes, and you're right. Their faith was very, very important. And many of them who came through talked about that faith and what it did. Susan.
Well, actually, I haven't read that book, but I would compare him to Viktor Frankl, who went through similar experiences and also wrote about them. And the old adage, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, it sounds kind of ridiculous when you're talking about the Holocaust. But I think if you can have kind of the mindset that you are going to survive, I am going to survive at all costs, even in the face of terrible tragedy, the utmost horror and terrible loss, you're going to live. And
yes,
in my own personal life, I've had so many orthopedic surgeries that I've sent several children to college. And each time I think, oh God, I'm never going to walk again. But then I do. And after each one, I feel I must have had faith. And I must have had faith in the surgeon, yes. Faith in my ability to heal, yes. But also I think that God was walking with me.
Very good and very nice. Rabbi Micah.
Micah's fine. I've been called worse. I thought about Viktor Frankl also, and the idea Frankl talks about the what he calls the last of the human freedoms, which is the freedom to choose your own attitude. That they can take everything away from you except for your freedom to choose your attitude. And somebody talked about faith earlier. One of the things, some of these people who came through the Holocaust, including maybe Elie Wiesel, talk about losing their faith. I think Wiesel came out of the Holocaust as an atheist, although don't quote me on that. But it seems to me that that doesn't mean that he lost his faith in the capacity of human beings to repair the world. And Elie Wiesel often in his writings and in his speeches talked about the notion of never again, of having this happen to us means that we can't allow it to happen to anyone else, and that we have to make the world better because human beings have such great capacity for destruction and for evil. So I wonder if some of the hope is found in the notion that people who are capable of great evil are also capable of great good, that we have this ability to repair the world when we use our powers for good.
Or when we choose to. And it's all about the choice. Anyway, this is a great group, I have to say. Wiesel was deeply, deeply influenced by his grandfather, who was a Hasidic Jew. And Hasids love to tell stories. And one of the reasons I like the book that I just showed you is because it has a lot of great stories in it. So one of the stories that Elie Wiesel told concerns a conversation that Golda Meir, who was Israel's foreign minister in the early 60s, and she had with then, the conversation she had was with then President John Kennedy. And it was very, very early in his presidency. And the story goes on a bit. So again, I had to synthesize it just a little bit. Mrs. Meir had an urgent request. She wanted weapons. President Kennedy asked if they could talk about something else. She said, no, our need for weapons is very urgent. Okay, Kennedy replied, you're from the land of the Bible. Can we talk about the Bible? No, she said, security is much more important and we need weapons. Look, Kennedy said, I can give you money. She said, money, you can give that to the UJA. We need weapons. That woman had a great sense of humor. I really like her. So he said, I can most likely get you political support from abroad. I can get you diplomatic support from the United Nations. And Mrs. Meir said, that would be really, really nice. And we'll take that. But we really need weapons. Finally, President Kennedy said, okay, we could have a formal security agreement where if it is attacked, Israel will be defended by the Sixth Fleet. Remember, the Sixth Fleet was huge back then. Thanks, replied Mrs. Meir. I appreciate everything that you've offered, but what we really need and what we really want is weapons. So Kennedy kind of lost his patience a little bit. He said, look, whenever I see you, you talk to me about weapons. Whenever I see your Jewish friends, they talk to me about weapons. What is the matter with all of you? Why are you so obsessed with weapons and nothing else? Remember, this is in 1961. So this was a time when Israel was kind of on the cusp. It was not as strong as it is today. And this is what she replied. And this is the crux of the story. She said, you see, Mr. President, I belong to an ancient people. Twice in our history, our country has been destroyed. Our capital has been demolished. Our temple has been reduced to ashes. Our sovereignty has been taken from us, and our children were dispersed to the four corners of the earth. And yet somehow we managed to remain alive. And do you know how? I'm going to tell you. Thanks to the shopkeeper in Bialystok, the tailor in Kyiv, the industrialist in New York, and the rebel in Leningrad, the Talmudist in Brooklyn, and the visionary in Spot. Though they came from different backgrounds, different lands, and they spoke different tongues, they had one thing in common. They had a dream that one day our sovereignty would be restored and our temple would be rebuilt. Mr. President, our temple has not been rebuilt yet. We've just begun. And should this beginning be foiled, should this beginning fail, the shopkeeper in Bialystok, the tailor in Kyiv, and all the rest of them, all these Jews who have a common dream, would no longer be capable of dreaming. I just thought that was the best story ever. And when I read it again, I mean, it's been decades since I read it, I got chills down my spine. So, what do you think the dreams were of the people like Elie Wiesel, who survived the Holocaust? That would be my first question after this. What were their dreams besides surviving? Robert.
Maybe he dreamt about a world where we don't need weapons.
From your mouth to God's ears. Yes, that would be a wonderful dream. A wonderful dream. Anybody else? Bob.
Peace and security, same idea.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Peace and security in the land.
Yes, a wonderful dream. Peace, first of all, and security. I mean, that would be awesome. I mean, to think that they thought they were secure, and yet they ended up being hauled off to concentration camps, and so many people died. Anne.
Well, you said what you wanted was weapons, so obviously I would think that she's looking to have an Israel. Without an Israel and without the land, we're a lost, wandering people again.
Yes, and yet, what got to me about that story was the way she united those disparate people, all with the same dream, that we would be able to go back, that we would be able to have a country where we could have peace and security, as Bob said. So we have a lot of I'm sorry, Susan, go ahead.
Well, I kind of hesitate to say this, but thus began a slippery slope.
Yes and no. Yeah,
I mean,
I'm not.
If you kind of look at where we are today, I mean, Israel is, and I don't want to be political, but Israel is desperately trying to hang on right now. And I understand that and I appreciate that. And they keep asking us for weapons. And clearly, as Anne said, without Israel, there's no Israel. There's no real peoplehood. There's no statehood. There's no symbol of our land and our faith. So that's what my comment, without being political.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, Susan, what you said is correct. I mean, where do we face when we pray? When we stand up for the Amidah, where do we face? We face Jerusalem. And by the way, it's really cool to be in Jerusalem, facing Jerusalem when you pray. Very, very cool. It's interwoven into all of our texts. It's interwoven into all of our prayers. The idea of Israel, and Israel is where our relationship with God began, and where our relationship with God continues. So yes, Israel plays an extremely important part. And when you think of where Israel was in 1961, when Golda Meir was asking for weapons, they were in pretty desperate straits. The Israel of 1961 and the Israel of today are like night and day. I mean, it's an entirely different country. And I think anybody who visited Israel in the 1960s, and I was not one of them, but people who went there cannot believe what a modern, bustling, wonderful country it is right now. And it has come a long, long way. So her asking for weapons then did make sense. Otherwise, they would not have been able to develop. Rabbi Micah.
Yeah, I have two thoughts. One is that I want to just push back a little bit and make sure and differentiate between the land of Israel and the state of Israel. Because
Correct.
Of course, the land of Israel sits at the center of Jewish consciousness in all kinds of ways, in our prayer book, in our thoughts, in our prayers. The state of Israel is a modern political entity, and one that I think, also sits at the center of Jewish consciousness in modern times, but in different ways. I don't think it's true to say that the state of Israel is the only possible symbol of Jewish peoplehood. And I say that as someone who loves the state of Israel, but has deep criticism for its current government, which brings me to my second point, which is that, the Israel of the early 60s is so different from the Israel of today. And I understand why Golda Meir needed all those weapons. And I wonder if part of the problem today is the difficulty transcending the mindset where what we need is all the weapons, right? You now have a basically strong country that with, and I like Susan, I don't want to get too political, but with a government that still is fighting a war of an existential war in a strong country, whereas the war that maybe needs to be fought is the war of how do you live in peace in the country? How do you create security in ways that don't involve weapons? So I both understand why early 60s Golda Meir needed to say what she said, and also wish that 2024 Netanyahu would not have the same mindset anymore.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Micah. And I think that the Jews that were alive, as you rightly pointed out, my generation is very aware of how fragile Israel was at that time, and how it could have been run over any moment, and how close we came to losing Israel altogether, both in 73 and in 67. So I mean, I can see why they needed weapons. I think the point that I wanted to make was the dream, that if we don't have the dream, then what do we have? And the other question I have for you is, if we look at the times that we're living now, we can create hope by the dreams that we have, and by doing what we need to do to make these dreams come alive. So what are the dreams that we all have right now in 2000? I can't believe I'm saying this, 2024. It's mind-boggling. And in 2024, what kind of dreams do we as people, as I was going to say as Americans, but a lot of you are Canadians, as North Americans and as Jews have? Let's see, Susan.
Well, I've talked a lot, so maybe I'll shut up after this. Personally, I dream that in 2025, I am not living in an authoritarian regime.
Interesting. Where, Susan, I'm sorry, where are you from?
Tucson, Arizona.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I hope it's not too hot down there right now. Robert.
Oh, yeah, I'm from Los Angeles, and I would say I have the same dreams that Heschel had in the 60s of justice and equality and social justice. And I would remind us that the Israeli government of 1961 was the people who put Adolf Eichmann on trial, who brought to light atrocities and crimes. And I think it's different from the government we have today.
Oh, definitely different from the government we have. I mean, the government we have today in the United States is totally different from the government that we had in 1960. Do any of the others have dreams that we can work towards to create the hope? I like what Micah says. I dream for people to be able to see each other as fellow human beings. Oh, thank you very much for saying that. I dream of a world where we are not labeled by what we believe, but what we are, and that we don't automatically not like people for what they believe and what they are. I see way, way too much of that, even in my own congregation. I see that, which I think is very, very sad. I also dream of a world where we don't have to be afraid. Anybody else have dreams that they have? Okay, Wiesel told one more story, and I really liked it. And this is actually a Hasidic tale this time. I mean, he did have a Hasidic background, so he had to tell Hasidic tales, right? And he said that the Hasidim came to inform the great Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Are you all familiar with Rabbi Nachman of Breslov? Yeah, absolutely fascinating human being. Anyway, they were talking about the renewed persecution of the Jews in Ukraine. It's interesting because Elie Wiesel called it the Ukraine, and we don't do that anymore. So in Ukraine. So they told him of the pogroms. They told him of slaughtered families. They told him of the desecrated synagogues and all kinds of atrocities. And he listened to all of them in silence, and he did not say a word. And then he spoke, and he said, I know what you want. You want me to shout. You want me to cry in despair, but I will not. I will not. Jews, do not despair. Jews, do not despair. So what Elie Wiesel took from this tale, and I really loved it, is he said, we owe it to our past not to lose hope. Say what you will, despair is not the solution, not for us, meaning us Jews. Quite the contrary. We must show our children that in spite of everything, we keep our faith in ourselves and even in mankind, though mankind may not be worthy of such a faith. We must persuade our children and theirs that 3,000 years of history must not be permitted to end with an act of despair on our part. To despair now would be blasphemy. It would be a profanation. So I have a couple questions that come out of what he said, that we should not despair, that it would be a profanation of 3,000 years of history to act with an act of despair on our part. So in today's climate where we actually, I mean, I know in my congregation, I have congregants who don't talk to each other because they have entirely different political views. They have entirely different views about what Israel is. Where do we find this hope? Where do we find this hope today? And how do we not lose hope? What keeps us going? Anne.
Well, I can only speak for myself, but I feel that the enemy of growth is despair. And if we just, each of us, just even try to imagine yourself as a holy person, because you're a Jew and you go out in the world and people are looking at you as a representative of a Jew. So if you pretend you're a Zadig and look at each person in that view, or just even try, maybe we can hear each other.
Thank you, Anne. That was very nice. That was very, very nice. Susan.
Okay. Hearing that last piece, what you read, and I apologize if I offended anybody with my semi-political observations. I do not have children and never married, but my sisters did and do. And I have 2 nieces, a nephew, and now a great nephew. And my hope is that their lives will be as fulfilling. They are not Jewish, but as fulfilling and hopeful as mine is. And that the things that I worry about, like climate change and other god awful things, do not befall them. I hope that they have the opportunity to live their full lives to their fullest. And I don't really know what else to say because it makes me kind of teary-eyed. I've never met the great nephew yet, but he's only 1. So there may be hope. But I have hope for the future, and I can't, even though I have fears, I can't. My glass is not half. My glass is full, and it is always being made fuller and fuller. And I hope that my young relatives have this, and all young people have the same feelings about their own lives.
Very, yeah, very, very nice. Oh, you have Bob has bees or something coming up in him. Anyway, one of the things that Rachel said in the chat, and it's kind of hard to watch you guys and the chat at the same time, but she says that we have faith in God, but God has faith in us. And maybe that is where our hope lies, that we can do things. We can do things to make changes. And if we just sit back and lose hope, then we lose the ability to try to make those changes. And I think that's where Elie Wiesel was absolutely instrumental. He worked his entire life for peace. He worked his entire life to make life better for other people. And because of that, I find him, despite his wordiness, I find him a very, very inspiring kind of leader for us to follow today. So, I mean, like I said, things look bad, but at the same time, if somebody like Elie Wiesel can come out of what he came out of and have hope and continue to do the things that he did, despite the fact of what he knew mankind could do, that I think that we can probably do much the same thing. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And listen to other Jews, although we may not agree. Yeah, we rabbis are supposed to do that too. I'm not so sure we do such a good job of it sometimes, but we try. Do we have any final thoughts that anybody wants to talk about? Make sure there's nothing in the, yeah, is it Aiko or Aika? Dream of a world we don't have to hate each other. It would be nice. Very, very nice.
Well, let me
Any
just
final?
jump in and say thank you. Rabbi Goldsmith or Lynn, did you have a closing thought, or should I go ahead and close us up here?
Okay, my closing thought was that if Elie Wiesel to me is the epitome of hope. And if he could go on and do what he did after he went through, then think how much we could do together. I mean, just think about it.